Morning, welcome to the next podcast of Andy Collier-talks cricket memorabilia. A little bit different today. We're going to have an interview with Rodney Ulyate, who's produced a lovely book on Ted Pooley. You may know as Surrey wicketkeeper and England wicketkeeper. This book is actually an autobiography, which is a bit odd, you'd have thought, because since he died in about 1909. So, Rodney, would you like to just give us a quick idea on why that's turned into an autobiography?
Yes, I would. One reason I didn't bother doing a biography of Mr. Pooley is because there already is one. A very well-written, well-researched, path-breaking volume, frankly, by Keith Booth, written as long ago as 2000. Now, since then, of course, a great deal of information's come to light. We know more about Pooley's family background, or at least, at any rate, I do. I found a ton of interviews. I've been able to absolve him of certain dubious charges placed to his debit. The idea that he was a match fixer, for example, tends not to have too much going for it. I've determined, for example, that he was probably the first wicketkeeper ever to dispense with the long stop. Now, having all this information, having unearthed it via things like Trove and the British newspaper archive, the question becomes, well, what do you do with it all? Do you write an update of Booth's book and risk sort of treading on his toes? Or do you do what I've done, which is to edit all of his surviving literary and oral remains into something like a coherent narrative in his own words? And that's the option I've taken, and I think it came out reasonably well.
Most of us will know generally that Ted Pooley was a bit of a naughty boy, and when he was in New Zealand, I think it was 1882, was it?
1877.
1877, even earlier. When he was arrested and put in jail, and would have been in the first Test match. Unfortunately, he was put in jail, and it never happened. So, as Rodney's explained to in his book here, which there's 100, he wasn't exactly the naughty boy, really. But this has just been reviewed with Martin Chandler as well, and it's got some lovely reviews on the back from David Frith, and we've got the Man of Three Counties as well, and the Professional Cricketer. So it's been well received already. I think he's already sold about 50 of these. I think there's 100 of these left, signed copies. So if you want to be quick and get these, you better get your skates on.
If you are slow though and cheap, there are an unlimited run of relatively inexpensive paperbacks as well.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
I won't be signing those though.
No, quite. Well, we had a nice. I had a nice afternoon trying to find Pooley's grave, which you found in the end, which was not in Lambeth at all. It was in Paddington. Old Paddington Cemetery.
Yeah, that is another find I'm pleased to have made. Keith Booth struggled about a quarter of a century ago to find Pooley's final resting place and wasn't able to. And now, again, with the advent of digitization and some very receptive people at the Brent City Council, I've been able to determine where he is. In fact, in the description to this video, I'm going to give you a link, Andy, a sort of Google Maps link that would lead those of you who are interested in paying tribute to the old boy precisely to his final resting place. It was a very moving and meaningful experience for me to.
And to be some Surrey supporters that'd be interested in that.
You would imagine.
And some wicket keepers, perhaps.
Your mate Piesse, of course, specialises in that sort of thing.
Doesn't he? That's right. Yeah, he was looking for it for a long time as well, but never found it like Keith didn't. So you have one up on you there. So that's great. So your expectations are hopefully going to sell a lot, with the sounds of it.
You would like to think so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I don't want to be burdened by a big stack of the things for the foreseeable.
But it is quite a different read, seeing as you're sort of seeing it in Ted Pooley's eyes. So I congratulate you on that.
Thank you, mate.
So we shall wrap up the interview now, unless you've got a couple of other bits and pieces you want to talk about the book.
Well, maybe I should say a bit more about the allusions I made earlier to having absolved Pooley of certain charges placed to his debit. The first was in 1873, when he was alleged to have fixed a match in Sheffield. His own testimony on this point is somewhat contradictory, but then the two items of testimony we have were made roughly a quarter of a century apart. Those discrepancies might lead some uncharitable readers to think, well, he was clearly lying in the one or not getting his story straight. I prefer to think, well, you know, a quarter century, you lived rather a hard life, as had Pooley by that stage. He was suffering in the workhouse. Perhaps he simply forgot or conflated two different circumstances.
I think he followed his ex-wife into the workhouse, didn't he, and children?
That's another find, yes, indeed. We all know that famously Pooley wound up in the workhouse, having squandered his benefit money on wine women and there's always a third,
betting.
but I can never remember. Yeah, and horses, apparently.
Yeah.
But it turns out that his wife, or his first wife, he had a sort of common law spouse named Minnie Pooley afterwards, his first wife, and their children, while Pooley was still a player and gainfully employed, themselves were sent to the workhouse, and there suffered, apparently estranged from him for a good many years. A deeply sad episode, and one that certainly doesn't reflect very well on him. But going back to Sheffield, 1873, I found a very important piece of testimony from Fred Gale, perhaps known to a lot of readers of cricket literature, more by his pseudonym, the Old Buffer, who seems to suggest that the person, if any, guilty of attempting to throw the match on that occasion was a chap named Farringdon Bolt, who, an amateur, hence perhaps the cover-up in his favour, who'd gone on WG's honeymoon tour, and who, very interestingly, never played for Surrey again after the incident I'm here describing. Gale suggests, that he'd made a naughty speculation against Surrey, got caught in the act. Pooley, to his credit, never snitched or anything, but seems largely to have taken the blame for it, as he did later in Christchurch, in respect of his more famous scandal. He was clearly guilty of assaulting his antagonist on that occasion, Ralph Donkin, a surveyor in Christchurch.
It did go both ways, though, didn't it?
What went both ways?
The punch up.
Oh, yeah, sort of, yeah. I mean, I think Pooley was very much the aggressor. It's certainly, he can't be absolved of having perpetrated an assault there. But the more serious charge against him, of course, was malicious damage to property. He was alleged to have gone into Mr. Donkin's room that evening and burnt his surveying equipment and clothing. Pooley seems, in fact, on the evidence of the court transcripts, which I've used in the preparation of this book, to have been entirely innocent on that score.
Sounded like it.
In fact, one of the guilty parties was almost certainly my ancestor, George Ulyate. At least I have a few ancestors in common with him. But again, Pooley, and again to his credit, took the fall for most of history and didn't snitch on his colleagues, even at great personal cost to himself.
No, fair play. Well, it's an interesting story, Rodney, I've got to say. So, and actually spoken in his own words, it makes it even more interesting. So, congratulations on that.
Cheers, mate.
And hopefully it all sounds well.
Yes,
that's great. So, just after that, now we're just going to go into Red Rose Books catalogue that turned up this week. And Martin T-Bay, his catalogue turned up this week. So it was all sorts of interesting bits and pieces in there, books and things, pamphlets. So you might not be on his postal list, but you can always get him on the internet. So Martin T-Bay there at Red Rose Books. That's another one to look out for. So that's about it for this week. Good luck to Rodney in selling the book, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.